And welcome back to Face the Nation. We return now to our conversation with Senators Graham and Blumenthal. Senator Blumenthal, before we get to Ukraine, I just want to tie up the Middle East here. You know, the defense secretary was testifying to Congress this week, and he said he's moved equipment meant to counter drones in Ukraine over to the Middle East now because of this escalation. What more is needed to protect U.S. personnel?
We need to move assets, and we've done so, not only to protect U.S. personnel, but also to enable Israel to defend itself against Iran's retaliation. But I think that the president is right to try to bring the two sides together. There is a deal that's possible here if Iran were to abandon its effort to build nuclear bombs that endanger not only Israel, but the entire regional stability, because all the other Arab nations are going to have nuclear weapons if Iran does as well. But Americans have no interest in a forever war. And so I think we need to be mindful about the priority of diplomacy here and bring the two sides together, as well as protecting U.S. personnel.
But Senator Graham, the thing with diplomacy is that the Israeli prime minister is calling for the Iranian people to rise up against the regime, a regime he says is calling for the destruction of his state. It doesn't really seem like there's a compromise there, if it's truly this existential. Is this just leading us towards the outcome you say, which is the United States getting involved in military conflict?
Well, this is what I would love for the regime to fall. If you want this regime to stay in power, you're wanting people to oppress the Iranian people. You want people to threaten their neighbors, to be the largest state sponsor. Who wants the largest state sponsor of terrorism to stay in place? But regime change is not the policy of the United States. It is not the purpose of this attack yet. But if there is one attack on an American anywhere in the Mideast by Iran, then you'll get regime change. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a non-negotiable part of the deal. They can't have a nuclear program that can make a bomb. Diplomacy is preferred, as Dick says, but force may be the only option. And I've said as clearly as I can say, if diplomacy fails, Mr. President Trump, you've been great. Help Israel finish the job, give them bombs, fly with them if necessary. I cannot stress to you how, if you want to get Russia right, you want to make China be better, you want to convince international terrorism we mean business, you got to finish the job with Iran.
Well, we'll see if there's any willingness to negotiate. So far, we haven't seen much.
Well, that's a big mistake on Iran's part. It's not on President Trump's. If we don't have negotiations, it's not because of Trump. It's because of the Ayatollah.
Or, I mean, you can't necessarily bomb someone into concessions that they were not willing to make, right?
Ayatollah Khomeini, no, but what you can do, you can make them wish that they didn't.
I don't think they have any desire to make concessions.
If Iran miscalculates now, it will face the consequences. But there is a road to a deal. President Obama reached a deal, far from perfect. President Trump ripped it up. If it were in effect, maybe we could have stopped the Iran nuclear buildup, which has occurred. They're close to 10 bombs now. But there is the possibility of diplomacy in the meantime. The United States ought to provide the means for Israel to defend against this Iranian retaliation.
And just to clarify, when you say close to 10 bombs, you mean they would have enough nuclear fuel. But as far as we know from the U.S. assessment, they hadn't made the political decision to turn that into a weapon.
What purpose?
We didn't hear that from the Senate Intel chair when I asked that.
What purpose is there for enriched uranium at 60% other than making a weapon? Why do you have 900 pounds of this stuff if you don't want to make a weapon?
Well, you know, the assessment was they wanted the leverage, right?
Yeah, right, so, whatever.
I want to ask you about the bipartisan work you are both doing, if I can. By the way, Iran and Russia.
And we're bipartisan on this. We say the same.
You are. Iran and Russia work together.
Add one more point about Iran.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about Russian sanctions. I think we ought to strengthen sanctions against Iran, which is a non-kinetic, a peaceful means of exerting pressure. I'm hoping that perhaps Senator
I will be your wingman. We'll write the bill right here on television. China, if you're listening, stop buying Russian oil and stop helping the Iranians. You'd make the world a safer place if you would stop.
They buy it because it's cheap, though.
Yeah,
And but
well,
right
then they
now,
should pay a price for propping up Putin's war machine.
well,
We should crush
sure.
their economy.
Okay, so tell me about that. So with the sanctions bill that you all are working on, you have a veto-proof majority. You
Yeah.
just need the Senate leader to put it to a floor, and you need the president to tell him go. What are you waiting for?
I think the president should call on the Senate to vote approval of the Russian sanctions bill literally tomorrow. He's on his way tonight to the G7 meeting. He will be sitting across from world leaders. Right now, very bluntly, the perception may be one of weakness in terms of America's position on Ukraine. He can be there in a position of strength. This bill will pass overwhelmingly, has 84 evenly divided co-sponsors. It will get 90 votes on the floor of the Senate. This moment cries out for presidential leadership. There is an urgency here. We've seen the neighborhoods decimated, people killed in their sleep, women and children shot in the back of their heads and buried in mass graves in Bucha, children who are kidnapped and re-educated, 20,000 of them behind Russian lines. These atrocities are ongoing, and the people of Ukraine are bleeding and dying. So I am hoping that the president will affirmatively show leadership here and call on the Senate to vote. The majority leader could do it tomorrow. We have some technical issues to work out, but I really think the moment has come for President Trump to call on the Senate.
But Senator Graham, President Trump tweeted yesterday that he did speak to Vladimir Putin, who called very nicely to wish me a happy birthday and talk about Iran. He said they're going to speak again this week. President Trump has put sanctions on Iran while talking to Iran. Why won't he put sanctions on Russia while talking to Russia?
We have sanctions on Russia.
Not new Trump sanctions. You know that.
So I find it odd. So my Democratic friends are holding him back when it comes to Iran. We really appreciate you trying to do diplomacy. What am I saying? Do diplomacy with Iran until it doesn't work. What am I saying with Russia? I don't mind you. I don't care if you go on vacation with Putin. I don't care how it ends. I want the war to end so we don't start new wars. I want Ukraine surviving when the war ends. I want Putin not to be overly rewarded for the invasion. To China, if you stop buying Russian oil cheap and India, the war machine would grind to a halt. President Trump has tried diplomacy, and I will say this. I talked to him last night. You've made very sincere efforts to get Putin to the table. I think he's playing a game with you and the entire world. It is now time to change the game with Putin. I talked to President Trump last night. Stay tuned. If we do not have a breakthrough soon, I would expect that these sanctions will move to the Senate and the House. And to China, if you want your economy ruined, keep buying Russian cheap oil. If you want to be a new nation in the eyes of the civilized world, change your behavior regarding Putin and the Ayatollah. Until you change your behavior, you're going to be seen as a problem, not a solution. So these sanctions are coming if Putin doesn't change. And to my good friend Dick, you've been a great ally. If we can't get the Ayatollah back to the table, it is now time to end his nuclear program using military force jointly with Israel if we have to. If we get Iran wrong, good luck with Russia.
Senator Blumenthal, the bill that you put forward will put a 500% tariff, as I understand it, on imported goods from countries that buy Russia's oil, their uranium, their gas, other products. It'd hit China, it'd hit India. U.S. is also trying to negotiate trade deals with them. Is that getting in the way?
I think there is really no obstacle to our moving ahead with these bone-crushing sanctions.
Even if oil prices spike because of what's happening in the Middle East?
You know, we are now energy independent when it comes to oil, the United States. Europe has weaned itself off Russian oil.
So I got a question. If we are energy independent, how come OPEC dominates the market to the degree of mandating prices? Something's going on here whenever it comes to the multi-trillion-dollar industry with the oil, to the degree that whenever OPEC decides to destabilize the market, basically all it has to do is lay off 10,000 employees. That way, the oil production is slowed way down, and it elevates the market. I had a cousin on my mother's side, Jackie Rex, that worked over in Saudi Arabia for years, working with the United States. I think it was the Navy, but it may have been the Army. I don't know. I think it was the Army. Anyways, he made, and this was back in the 70s and the 80s. He was making over $100,000 a year back then. Something has happened with our internal affairs in America truly being in charge whenever it comes to being dictated to by these foreign entities. Now we want to say, or they want to try to convince us that we are a stable nation and that we basically are a self-sustainable energy nation, which in all aspects, looking at the oil market over here pertaining to how many
we've incorporated flexibility in this bill based on our national security for a potential waiver where our interests are concerned.
We should be stable. We should be stable in being self-sustainable with our energy. But how come we get dictated to towards whether or not the prices go up or down?
In the billions of dollars, giving them a little bit more time to adjust. This is a
They
carefully
get 20% of their
constructed
gas
bill.
from Russia, right?
What he says that there's three categories. If you're not doing business with Russia, you don't have anything to worry about. If you're doing business with Russia, but you're helping Ukraine, you have a carve out for 270 days. If you're doing business with Russia and not helping Ukraine, you're screwed. The president can waive part of all of this based on our national interest. But to the people who wonder, should we pay a price for our freedom? We have in the past. Go to Arlington. Oil prices will go up if we confront Russia through our bill. Oil prices will go up if we try to confront Iran for their nuclear ambitions. But you pay now or you pay later. If we get Iran right and we get peace with Russia.
No, we pay now and then pay later. See, they was preaching this same song and dance 35, 40 years ago during Ford and Nixon era and Carter and Reagan era. Well, we're still paying. Like I said, whenever the adjustment happens with the oil production pertaining to the prices, we get affected over here. But yet now we're supposed to be a self-sustainable energy source? Don't make sense. Something's going on.
Seeing now between military forces, federalized, and protesters is partly because of what Democrats have done to date.
The use of military, whether it's the National Guard or the Marines, can be inflammatory and provocative. We had protests across the country yesterday that were entirely peaceful.
That's a lie too.
A number of them in
That's another lie.
Hartford and Farmington and elsewhere, all around the country. I think this country knows how to do peaceful protest, and
they do know how to do it, but will they do it?
And prosecutors, local,
they're suppressing the media, and our government is suppressing information to us. And I think the young children know this, pertaining to those that are media savvy with social media, that they stay in tune. We know what's going on. They know what's going on. They can get up there, they can lie all they want to on national TV, but the fact of the matter is, it was not all peaceful protest.
Rebellion, and compel the president to come back to Congress for approval if he uses this kind of federal force. So I think that there are criticisms to be made of immigration policies. In fact, I favor comprehensive immigration reform. We need it. But that
you would
is
call on
separate.
local law enforcement to perhaps stand up more and deal with it at the local level.
It's the local level where law enforcement happens in this country. We rely on state and local police, and that ought to be the way we enforce our laws in this country and emphasize the importance of peaceful protests, such as we saw yesterday around the country.
All right, senators, thank you for joining us for a bipartisan interview. Rare, as we said. We'll be back.
Only parts of the country had peaceful protesting. There's a lot of that stuff that won't ever meet the headlines. There's a lot of that stuff that won't put it on national TV. That's the reason why the majority of your shootings, that's 3 or less, you may pick it up on a local paper somewhere if you know about it, but if you don't pick it up on a local paper somewhere, you'll never know about it. You got to exceed 3 to 5 deaths per shooting that's considered a mass shooting, and even at that, that still may not make the national headlines because they're limiting the truth, number one, or the preservative of the truth. And basically what they're saying is, well, we put a certain percentage upon people's deaths as far as their worth, and regardless if it's 3 or less deaths, that should be handled on a local level because it don't meet the criteria of being promoted on a national level. But once in a blue moon, you'll find somebody over in Cancun, Mexico that gets kidnapped or gets killed, or even somebody over here that's a special person. They may have a lot of money, they may have a lot of influence, they may have whatever. They promote that. They put that on national TV. Oh yeah. Because it meets their own personal criteria, their own personal agendas. So the bottom line is this: we did get taken over in the late 80s, and now we're paying the consequences on account of it. It's sad.
50 states and Washington, D.C., as part of an organized effort to protest President Trump's policies, including recent deportation sweeps. Organizers of the No Kings rally said that over 5 million people participated coast to coast.
You know, that's something else I don't understand about, well, I guess I do, pertaining to the flip-floppiness of the people towards them turning one way just as quickly as they do the other. But it was the majority.
Riot outside an ice.
It was the masses of the people that voted Donald Trump in to take care of this problem pertaining to hiring ICE and getting rid of all these illegal immigrants. Well, now they're turning on Donald Trump. It just tells you how unstable that these people over here are.
Living a little bit fearful right now because of what we're seeing, these increasingly cruel and extreme immigration enforcement rates. But nonetheless, they're going to work trying to provide for their families.
Well, I want to ask you about your personal experience with some of this. As many of our viewers saw that video of you being briefly detained when you were trying to get a question in to the Homeland Security Secretary. Her office later said you spoke for nearly 15 minutes afterwards. Did you get the answer to the question you were trying to ask? And what was it?
Yeah, sadly, no. And to a little bit of context here, the reason I the reason I was at the press conference, I mean, it was at a scheduled briefing with representatives of Northern Command, just a couple doors down the hall in the same federal building when I learned of the press conference. My briefing delayed because the folks I was supposed to meet with were at that press conference. So I asked if we could listen in. I was escorted over, and that's what I was doing. Why? Because for months and months, whether it's in committee, the secretary herself testifying and not providing substantive answers to questions, other representatives of the department, formal letters and inquiries that we've submitted, doing my job as a senator to get information as part of our oversight and accountability responsibility. Mm-hmm. So to be able to ask a question of the secretary directly, when they offered the meeting after the incident, I took it, but sadly, no, nothing substantive, nothing informative.
She couldn't answer the question, or
either couldn't or wouldn't, and frankly, that says a lot, right? In terms
what
of
was the
title. Well, among other things, their justification for the federalization of the National Guard, not only not necessary, but counterproductive, as we've seen this last week in Los Angeles, and also just truth. For all the talk about the focus and targeting of violent criminals, if that's all the Trump administration was doing, there would be no debate. There is no disagreement on that.
If the governor of the state would have done its job effectively and efficiently, Donald Trump wouldn't have had to have stepped in towards federalizing National Guard troops. See, they don't tell the whole truth whenever they're up there talking, do they?
Fields in healthcare, construction, etc. That's who's being targeted now, and that's why there's so much fear and terror in communities, not just in Los Angeles, but throughout the country.
So the vast majority of immigrants in California, we went and we looked at the stats. They are in this country legally, but Pew Research says your state has nearly 2 million undocumented, and they make up about 7% of the entire labor force in some of those farming and service jobs that you talked about. Since the Trump administration this week told ICE to pull back a bit when it comes to enforcement, do you see that as a step in the right direction? And do you know what triggered that decision?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what triggered that decision. I'll take it. Is it a step in the right direction? It's at least a baby step. Let's hope there's more to follow, because they're responding to what I and others have been saying for months and frankly years, going back to the first Trump administration. You want stats? Let's talk about stats. The state of California, the most populous state in the nation, the most diverse state in the nation, home to more immigrants than any state in the nation, mostly documented, some undocumented. This is the same California that is the largest economy of any state in the nation, fourth largest economy in the world, not despite the immigrant population, but thanks to the contributions of so many immigrants as workforce, as consumers, and as entrepreneurs. So again, focus on the dangerous, violent criminals, no disagreement there, but the folks who are otherwise law-abiding, tax-paying, and enriching communities, there's got to be a better way, a pathway towards legalization, a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, farm workers, and others.
Well, that is hoping for movement in Congress that would take some time. I did note it was interesting to see in the House, the Republican Hispanic Conference put forth a letter asking for a breakdown of how many criminals were among those actually deported.
And that was one of the key questions I had for the secretary. Of course, she had no data, had no answer, promised to follow up. I hope. Yeah. We'll see. And I also want to be clear about this, because when I had the audacity to try to ask a question as a senator of a cabinet secretary, that's what happened. And you saw the response, everybody's seen the video. It wasn't about me, right? If that's how this administration responds to the senator with a question, don't just imagine what they're capable of, but what they are doing when the cameras are not there.
And who's to say that wasn't framed or staged?
Disrespectful treatment of so many people who deserve much better.
See, it's gotten to the point that you can't trust none of them.
There still is broad support for President Trump's mass deportation policy. Our last CBS poll, as of last Sunday, showed 54% approval. There was an interesting Washington Post piece written by David Ignatius that was pretty sharp about Democrats, saying that they've gotten the border issue so wrong for so long, it's political malpractice. And that he was basically arguing Democrats are handing to Trump the confrontation he wanted with the military, citing actions during the first administration. Do you think that he has a point there?
Well, I think
it's been political malpractice ever since the Reagans and the Bushes went in there. They was lying to the people. They wasn't being honest to the people, just like it was law enforcement malpractice pertaining to what they done in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas, just like it was law enforcement malpractice pertaining to them not revealing the whole truth pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing, just like it's probably political practice pertaining to 9/11 that we're still not getting down to the bottom of, that even Donald Trump made clear of. Too many lies, too many signals. Can't put no trust in nothing or nobody.
buying homes, contributing to the strength of our economy, they deserve better.
You are the ranking member on the Senate Rules Committee, which oversees the Capitol Police. What, if anything, can you tell us about the state of security for lawmakers, given what's happening in Minnesota?
Yeah, look, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and work directly with both the U.S. Capitol Police and the Senate Sergeant at Arms, and they're doing what they need to do to ensure the safety of members of Congress. But I also think it's more than appropriate to step back and say, why are tensions so high? Not just in Los Angeles, but throughout the country. And I can't help but point to the beginning of not just the first Trump term, but the beginning of the campaign.
Because the public has awakened being $36 trillion in debt, knowing that if we continue on this path, America's no longer going to be America. And if the truth be known, in ways, America isn't what America should be today, because we've done already sold out to too many cooks in the kitchen.
And that's just indicative
You
of
wanted
the
her
Trump
to say, wait a second, I know who he is, calm down, let him go. Is that what you're
The
saying?
vast majority of people in that room knew who I was. Escorted into that room by an FBI agent and a National Guards member. It's the Los Angeles Press Corps. It said United States Senate on the chest of my polo.
Senator Padilla, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back in a moment.
We're talking about innuendos, and they're not giving full facts in what's going on. And in the meantime, the American people are being ravaged again and again and again by all these natural catastrophes that continue to keep hitting us out of the blue. And of course, there's only a few of us that really know the truth about what's actually going on. In the meantime, concern has invaded the general public by and large, those that do care about tomorrow, those that do care about their children or their children's children pertaining to their future. And that's the reason why that you're seeing this urgency fall upon to society. My question is, how come society, and I said this probably back, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months before Donald Trump ever become president, that it could be done the way that they're going to do it with ICE, with the illegal immigrants. But the American people needs to get ready to see some things that they haven't been adjusted to in the norms of saying, wow, was that right or wrong? Well, first of all, the camera is very deceiving because you only see and hear one side of it ordinarily. That's the reason why that they can basically take an event that happens with law enforcement and either use it to justify law enforcement or use it not to justify law enforcement. There's only a few cases, it's cut and dry, that law enforcement has messed up on because by and large, they know how to manipulate the camera. And if they can manipulate the camera pertaining to media, they can manipulate the people. Well, now, whenever you're $36 trillion in debt, now you're cutting here and cutting there and managing here and managing there, the people are becoming overly concerned and you can't really blame them. But my question is, how come they go one way, but because they see a little action going on, now they all of a sudden want to go the other way towards backing off from the very reason why that they elected Donald J. Trump to be president to begin with, was to help to get these people out of here. See the wish-washiness of it? You really can't put no faith in the public. And really and truly, ever since basically about 93, 94, whenever I went to work in Jackson, Tennessee for Steve Hardy in the body shop industry, and I got to watching how that he would document every little thing about an automobile. It didn't matter if it was a pothole seed in the seat. It didn't matter if it was a scratch. It didn't matter if it was a ding. It didn't matter if we was working on the right side of the car and the left side had something wrong with it. He documented everything about that automobile whenever it come into his presence. And the reason why is because the public has become so dishonest, if you don't watch, they'll take you to the cleaners and basically cut off their own noses to despite their faces. And I guess they're either too wicked or too deceived or too blind to see these things. But you can take a good thing and manipulate it in making it look like it's a bad thing. Or you can take a bad thing and manipulate it to the point of convincing the people that it's a good thing. This government over here has the power that they can literally literally destroy a human being's life and never touch that person. All they got to have is a whacked out doctor and a whacked out judge, and the next thing you know, this person is being put away for life because of biasness decisions. And it almost reached that level right here in Northwest Tennessee. And if my brother and I wasn't smart enough to identify the entrapment trickery that was going on, we would have fallen prey to that type of entrapment. And the next thing you know, there would have been blood on the floor, even though it was justifiable blood, even though they deserved in getting what they done, but because certain political officials in Northwest Tennessee wasn't willing to do their job towards standing in our corner, we get swept away. We get swept away. And it wouldn't have mattered whether or not you had a camera on it or not. It wouldn't have mattered if you'd had a body directly over here in the center of 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. They would have had a way to manipulate it. Just like my brother and I, before he died, we had police officers that was coming to David's property and to my property, to the extent that right there before my brother died, it was getting so intense that I had went to Jackson and picked up 2 or 3 items, and I'm always good about keeping my receipts. Well, this individual from the sheriff police department was trying to emphasize that I was doing something in another area to another person. And it wasn't until I pulled out the receipts and I blowed his duck out of the water towards saying, how could I have done that whenever I was over here doing this? So they're very manipulative. They're very, well, whatever the word may be that I'm looking for, in trying to entrap their citizens based upon biasness behavior. Like my son said, whenever all this went down and my brother died and I wound up in jail about 10 days later, and then things kind of cooled off about 6 to 8 months later, my son said, well, Dad, you know what it was, don't you? I go, no, what was it? He goes, because there was a community uproar down there. He said it was much easier for them to turn the tables because they wasn't doing their job towards arresting you and making it look like that you was the perpetrator versus about 8, 10, or a dozen families down here that was just making our lives freaking miserable. Making our lives absolutely miserable by terrorizing our lives. I mean, for 3 consecutive solid years, we would have as many as 4 or 5 cops that would drive from Dresden, Tennessee to here, which is probably about a 30-minute drive, give or take a few minutes one way or the other, depending upon how fast you drive. But we would have between 4 and 5, maybe 6 automobiles down here with cops, sometimes scheduled as many as 2 and 3 times a month for 3 consecutive years, and they still couldn't get a toehold on what was going on. They didn't want to get a toehold on what was going on. They didn't want to manage the situation that was going on down here. They wanted to be like the rest of the evil, demonic, wicked people towards Barry Juby, away with him, away with him, away with him. But basically the same thing that they done with Jesus Christ whenever, I think it was Pilate that gave the public a decision of releasing Barabbas or releasing Christ, and every time he mentioned the name Jesus Christ, away with him, away with him, away with him. In other words, they didn't want this type of restriction placed upon their lives pertaining to this man that claimed to be the Savior for all of mankind. They weren't going to have it. They was not going to have it. And they had rather release the worst of the worst, which was Barabbas, which was known of being nothing but a hook and a crook and a cheat and a liar, and who knows, he may have been a murderer too. He was the worst of the worst. And to think that the public would rather release him than they would Jesus speaks volumes about their biasness against Jesus. Even though Jesus never harmed or hurt nobody, even though Jesus was feeding the masses, even though Jesus was healing the sick, even though Jesus was causing blind eyes to see, even though Jesus was turning water into wine, they weren't going to have it. Why? Because of the masses. the masses dominates justice in our courts, or the higher dollar for sale. In other words, if you got the right money, you got the right attorney, the right Johnny Cochran attorney, the glove don't fit, so they must acquit. You can manipulate anything in your favor if you got the right resources. And basically, like my son said, it was much easier for them to go after one person than it was to go after basically half of the community down here. And he was right. He pegged it right. He knowed exactly what was happening and what was going on. But they was basically torturing my life, especially after my brother did die. They was actually torturing my life by driving by here and calling me a pedophile and saying that I'd killed my brother and all this other crap. I mean, you talk about cruelty on a psychological scale. I had never been subject to this type of abuse before in my entire life. And I had been through some very, very abusive situations, especially up in Lambatoina Lakes and LBL. I had been through some excruciating problems beginning in 2005 after my wife decided to walk out of my life, and they decided up here in Martin, Tennessee that they was going to charge me for falsifying files, and I basically had to walk away from this whole area because I'd lost my mini farm. My wife declared bankruptcy. I had declared bankruptcy. My wife divorced me for the second time, and I know that all these law enforcement agencies or people that was acknowledged about me that was trying to destroy me on an inside job was after me. So the next best thing for me to have done was to pack up and go somewhere else where it wasn't near, where the heat wasn't near as hot. That's basically what I had to do whenever I was up in Kentucky in the year 2007, after they shut down the dam, and after they come to me not once but twice within a 10-day period and wanting to know if I had any intentions towards wanting to do brutally bodily harm to the citizens of Kentucky by blowing up the Kentucky Dam. Once I identified what was going on towards them wanting to destroy me, I packed up and I left. I went to Denver, Colorado. I got out of this area because I know what they was up to. And then in the exchange of me having to come back because I hadn't finished the ceremony, they was going to make sure that old Jibby wasn't going to finish this 40 night ceremony pertaining to getting the second swords sanctified by God, to the degree that as soon as I pulled in down here in LBL, I get 2 pieces of paper from Dwayne Camry. One of them was in this motion, and another one was in that motion, and basically telling me that I was being summoned. But to tell you how off the record that they was up there in Kentucky with their so-called charges, I know that the headquarters of the National Forest Service basically was all scheduled through Atlanta headquarters, and I was continuously calling because I was still working at the time, going to Georgia, going to North Carolina, going to different places, even Alabama. I was still on the road, basically living like a fugitive, as my brother would say. But I was continuously calling this office down there in Atlanta, trying to figure out if the paperwork had ever come through towards these charges. I had them in my hand towards it being like a ticket, but it never had gone before the courts. So what did I do? I got tired of waiting for this cat and mouse game because I feel like that what they was going to do, they was going to try to pull the wool over my eyes and throw those charges off into the federal court system, because Lambatoina Lakes is a federal park, got to be handled on a federal level, kind of like a post office. It don't matter if you break out a window on a post office, it's still a federal building, and because of it, it goes before the federal magistrate. They was going to throw this charge at me, and me unbeknowns, and at that time I was on the road, and there would have been no way for me to have met the court date, and the next thing you know, I would have had warrants for my arrest over somebody that was biased against me, that didn't like what I said to them over the telephone before I come back from Denver, Colorado, back to Land Between the Lakes and finishing out that in which what I needed to finish, which was in the year 2007, in the fall of 2007. What did I do? Well, I go to Paducah. I go before the federal court system there, and I talk to them about the situation, and I show them these tickets that have been written out by Dwayne Camry. And I go, something's going on here, because this has never cycled through the system. And I'm just afraid that they're going to throw this unbeknownst to me through the system during the time that I'm not really watching, because it was tormentive. It was very tormentive in having to keep up with this, because I was trying to get on with my life. And I explained to them what was going on, and they went ahead and recorded the situation. They documented the two tickets coming from LBL by Dwayne Camry. And then a day or two later, they contacted me and they said, come back up here, we'll talk about it. So I went back up there, went before their little deal there. They said, well, this is the deal. They have decided not to do nothing on an authoritarian level with these two tickets, but they rather you stay away and don't bother them no more. Well, I took that with a grain of salt from 2007 up until 2009, which was 2 years later. And there's so much unbelievable unforeseeables there that went on pertaining to me having to go up to Kentucky and help them during the ice storm and everything else. But once they realized that I wasn't going to back off from LBL, like one of the individuals said, you're spending entirely too much time up here, and if you're going to live up here, you need to learn how to adapt to these people's ways. Well, I wasn't living up there. I was spending a great deal of time up there, but I was not living up there. But the thing about it is, I got on their radar screen in 2007 when my dad contacted them and told them to stop me at all costs, that I was on a cop by suicide mission. And from then on, I couldn't get them off. I couldn't shake them. And of course, whenever I went back up there in 2009, once more, because I'd left some harmonious messages on their recording machine with law enforcement there in LBL, right off from Golden Pond, they thought that was enough information to bury me. And that's whenever the handcuffs got on me. That's whenever I actually did get arrested, this time, an actual arrest. And I was in the system at that time, in the federal system. And that's whenever I was given the ultimatum of either going and being having a study done, or face the consequences on a Class C felony because of premeditated murder, because of me saying that I was going to go after Satan in the flesh, that was a darkly complected individual over in Saudi Arabia. But even at that, there was still a hidden agenda. You know what the hidden agenda was? They made a deal with Mr. Wildesworth that if you go through this testing and everything's okay, whenever you come back here, we're going to drop all the charges. Well, in the meantime, somebody had to pay for all this. In the meantime, this has taken about 6 months out of my life. Now, this was not the first national federal study that I'd went through. The first study that I went through was in 1991, whenever Wheeling, West Virginia, pertaining to the federal authorities up there, made lies that I was some sort of a lunatic, going to be an assassin toward trying to assassinate George Walker Bush's life, which was nothing but a lie. But I went through that same circuitry. It was in a different area, but I went through the same type of circuitry pertaining to the federal court system in going to Butler, North Carolina. What they was hoping for, and this is where God intervened, what they was hoping for was that I would have basically hung myself. And at that time, they really don't know. Whenever they assign for you to be studied, they really don't know because there's different mental health facilities associated with the federal facility in different areas. There's one main headquarter, which I think is in Springfield, Missouri, but there's other entities throughout the countryside. And whenever they assign for you to be studied like this, they really don't know where you're going to wind up going. Well, I wound up going to downtown Nashville. Downtown Nashville, right off the loop there, off of Riverside Drive, where the stock exchange is, right next to the little river, and the federal buildings and everything else, and MCC facility, because it's associated with mental health. In the process of doing all that, Dr. Dana, my doctor at the time, requested not once but twice for the paperwork to come from Paducah, Kentucky to justify their actions pertaining to why this individual was being studied. Paperwork not one time made it to their office. Not one time did it make it to their office. You think that was coincident? No. That's called divine intervention, is what that's called. Especially knowing that they had approached that situation with all the other courts, with all the other problems, with all the other charges all over the country, now twice. And it never come back to them and why that they was wanting this study to begin with. So naturally, Dr. Dana's office in MCC in downtown Chicago had to look at the situation and say, well, this is going to just be an overall study. We don't know what prompted this study, but because of it, we're just going to use the basic instruments in this study, because they hadn't been given no leadway by the federal courts in Paducah, Kentucky. On the way to MCC in downtown Chicago, they got a thing called the Hub. The Hub is basically in the center of the nation, or close to the center of the nation, pertaining to Oklahoma. That's where basically everybody gets transported into before they get assigned towards where they're going to go out to. In other words, if you get a sentence from a federal magistrate of 10 years or 20 years, you go to Oklahoma first. And then once you leave Oklahoma, then you have gone through the system to the degree that they know exactly what facility that you're going to spend your 10 years in, whether or not it's going to be the East Coast, West Coast, up north, or down south. But until then, the judges actually don't know where you're going. They can probably put in for a request, depending upon whether or not it's a whatever they call it type scenario, where, let's say, a politician gets caught doing something that he's not supposed to do, and yeah, he spends time, but he spends time down in a prison somewhere, let's say in Denver, Colorado, looking over a big mountainside, and basically has the amenities of almost being at home. They do got certain political prisons set up for political prisoners that they want to chastise, but they don't want to give them the full they don't want to give them the full harshness of their sentence. So they got different places set up. They got places up in East Tennessee. They got places everywhere set up just for high-ranking individual cases. Now, those particular cases, yes, I'm pretty sure the judge can put in a special request of the system. I want this particular person to go to this particular prison if anywhere possible. That way they can basically kosher on the penalty that they're giving this person. In the meantime, as I'm going through the system in Oklahoma, I'm in a cell, a 2-man cell, lock the doors. I'm by myself. They don't let you know nothing. It's part of their secrecy. They don't want you to know when you're scheduled to leave. They don't know where you're going. They don't want you to know where you're going, because they're afraid that you can contact your buddies, and the next thing you know, you set up some sort of an ambush. So when it comes to the federal government, they're very secretive in their prison system. Very secretive. in the meantime, while I'm in this pod, in this cell, about 2 o'clock in the morning, one of the guards come in with another prisoner, opens up my door, and lets this guy in. Very tall, kind of blonde hair. And within 15 minutes, I'm already up, and we're having a discussion, and the discussion is about me. And after that, this went on with this discussion, give or take, for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I'm figuring out that this guy knows more about me than, in lots of different cases, than I know about myself. And he was giving me good, strong advice. He was telling me, whatever you do, don't volunteer any information to these people. Because once you get up there, you're going to be in their charge, in their hands. And if you say the right stuff to the wrong person, it can still cost you your freedom, because they'll announce you towards you being unfit, towards being out in the eyes of the general public. And once they do that, once a doctor makes a decision like that, then he'll go before a judge to prove his case. And a lot of times it's not a matter of proving their case, it's just a matter of opinionated. It's a matter of biasness behavior, depending upon how strong or how weak the case may be. But they can basically take an individual that a doctor and a judge says they're unfit to be out in the eyes of the public, and because of it, we're not just testing this person, we're just not evaluating this person, we're actually going to have this person admitted. And chances are you'd probably go someplace like Springfield to an actual mental health prison facility. And if you wasn't crazy whenever you went in, odds are, after they got through experimenting with you with this type of drug to see if it made you swell up, or this type of drug to see if it made you lose weight, or this type of drug to see if it made you lose all your hair, or this type of drug to see if it got to the point that you become dementia. If you wasn't crazy whenever you went in, you would be crazy before you ever got out, hoping that you never would get out. In other words, the hidden agenda in behind the plan in Paducah, Kentucky, standing in front of that federal judge with the public defender of Mr. Woodisworth from Louisville, Kentucky, was hopefully Mr. Jackson will hang himself. That was the whole hidden agenda. Hopefully, we won't have to go no further with this. That's the reason why I think that God appointed an angel to come into my cell. Because basically, before I laid my head down and went to bed, the bottom line was, the less you say, the more you're saying. The less you say, the more you're saying. Well, I went to bed. This guy went to bed. And I woke up that morning, he was gone. Wasn't nobody in the cell. I'm thinking to myself, that's kind of odd, because those metal doors are very noisy. And for them to have snuck him out like that after we went back to bed, probably about 3, maybe 3:30, is almost slim to none. So whenever the guard come back to give me my food that morning, I asked him, I said, what happened to that other guy? What happened to that guy that come in here last night? And they looked at me kind of funny and said, what guy? I said, there was a prisoner that come in here last night, late. Nope. Nobody's been in there, buddy. You've been in there all by yourself. Here, eat your breakfast. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. This guy comes into my cell. He knows almost everything about me. He gives me strong advice. I go to bed and wake up, and supposedly he never existed. But I took his advice in going to Dr. Dana, and I only answered the question thoroughly in what that they was asking. In other words, I didn't elaborate on the answer. I didn't go into all these details pertaining to the Antichrist, pertaining to the one world government, pertaining to the New World Order, pertaining to the 2 witnesses, pertaining to the opening of the 4 horsemen of the 7 seals. I didn't get into all that, because I know that if I did, it was an area that could very well be confusing to the psychiatric community, to the degree that Dr. Dana, rather than giving me a high score, he could have very well said, you know what, I think this person is this, this, and this, and because of it, I'm recommending for further evaluations and for him to be admitted in the program. And that would have been a way to have eliminated me out of the eyes of the public domain. And that would have been a way for the people up in Kentucky, especially the people up in around Grand Rivers and Benton and Calvert City and all them other places that freaked out whenever they made the mistake that they made in thinking that I was going to do something to their dam, in which I wasn't. But that would have relieved the ideal towards accountability, towards them never having to worry about seeing or hearing of me again, because I would have disappeared. Well, I didn't disappear. And yes, the judge did put me on, this time, a 2-year mandated probation. Mandated probation. He said, don't contact them, don't mail them, don't email them, don't even send them a smokestack. Stay away from Land Between the Lakes for 2 years, Mr. Jackson. Then after that, you can go on about your life. Because at first, he looked at me and he goes, we can make your life a whole lot more complicated than what you can make ours. He goes, under the circumstances, I'm going to go ahead and fulfill my promise that we're going to drop the charges. Because I scored high. I scored high enough that the federal judge had to apologize to me. And for a federal judge to apologize to somebody on the stand is almost next to none. Almost next to none. And he basically applauded me by saying what type of high scores that I had made. You know why I made those high scores? Because I kept my mouth shut, number one. And another reason why I got those high scores was because the paperwork that originated that investigation in Paducah, Kentucky, out of the federal courts, never made it to MCC in downtown Chicago. So because of it, now I was on a plain, even keel. The doctors wasn't being persuaded one way or the other of why that they was interested in me to begin with. Rather not I was a thief, rather not I had a sexual problem, rather not I was a murderer, rather not I was this or that. They really didn't have no idea. So they was basically having to score me off of their basic playing field, in which you basically go through the same type of rigorous testing, but they just tweak it just a little bit differently. Keep in mind, I already went through this same song and dance in North Carolina, Butler, North Carolina. Whenever I'd wake up after being drilled the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, having to go in front of this panel of doctors, all of them wearing white suits, male and female, looked like there was about 20 people in there, basically had to come to this big table. And they went to asking you all kinds of questions, and they would ask you the same question, but they would reword it differently. And what they was trying to do was flub you up in seeing if you was really sincere in what that you was telling them. Because if you was lying, eventually, if you tell enough lies, you'll eventually forget what lie that you told to be able to cover up the first lie, and the next thing you know, they'll catch you at it. So my philosophy was, tell the truth, stick to the truth, keep your story straight, and remain telling them the truth, regardless of how they word it, regardless of how they question it, regardless of how many times they may question it. You tell them the truth. And if you tell them the truth and you stick to the truth, odds are you'll never flub up. You'll never flub up. Nor did I. But because I was aware of the system, may have helped me to be able to get through the system, along with the individual that suddenly appeared into my jail cell and then unexplainably disappeared in my jail cell within probably about 3 or 4 hours. He was gone, and there wasn't no record of anybody being in there. I think that was divine intervention, just like I think it was divine intervention in the paperwork, never leaving Paducah, Kentucky, and winding up at the desk of Dr. Dana, because that is a big determining factor in how they're perceiving the problem to begin with. And it gives the doctors a leadway towards, well, which way should we go at this? Should we go at it this angle, that? Because they can go at it at any different angle that they want. It's kind of like looking at the ink spot that I've been asked a million zillion times. What do you see whenever you look into the ink spot? Do you see a butterfly? Do you see your mother being raped? Do you see your father raping your mother or killing somebody? What do you see whenever you look into this ink spot? You know what I see whenever I look into the ink spot? An ink spot. They're wanting to know if you have an imaginary imagination. And believe it or not, whenever you look into the ink spot, you can see anything that you want to see in that ink spot. And it's based upon the analogy of the glass of water that's either half full or half empty, which goes back to the concept of you either being positive or negative. Once they start their little questionnaire in what they're trying to achieve, they automatically go into leads. Well, we need to go this way. Or no, we need to change our questions and we need to start going this way. It's kind of like profiling a person. It used to be, years ago, the only way to profile a person was to actually talk to that person, question that person, see where that person was living, see where that person was driving, see where that person was working, providing that he was working. And in some cases, the best way, and the only way in some cases at that time, was to actually walk into that person's room or walk into that person's house or apartment and look on the walls to tell what this person was interested in, what this person liked, what this person was attracted to, whether or not it was fishing, whether or not it was sports, whether or not it was religion, whether or not it was beautiful girls or beautiful guys, or something related around nature. It was a way that they could profile people. Today, they do it now routinely all the time by studying your work. They look at your social media platform to determine whether or not you're this way, that way, or over here, over there. In other words, they're steadily analyzing us and they're deciphering us toward trying to figure us out. And believe it or not, you still have people to this day that has read the Bible, especially the New Bible, the New Testament Bible, King James or New King James, that continues to keep studying, deciphering Jesus' teachings, and they're still not closer today than what they was whenever they started all this 2,000 years ago in trying to understand this individual. You know why they can't understand the individual? Because it's not meant for them to understand that individual. That's the reason why that individual spoke in parables. That's the reason why people like Nostradamus wrote down his ideals and his thoughts in manifestos pertaining to being secretive about what he was actually saying, because he didn't want the wrong people to interpret what he was saying or doing, and the next thing you know, he'd have been executed on account of it. That was back during the Dark Ages, whenever they was burning Bibles. That was back in the Dark Ages, whenever there was a lot of cruel, evil, demonic stuff going on, especially among the psychiatric communities that would basically take somebody and bury them, and literally bury them into a enclosed area. Usually it was a cellar or a basement where they kept people confined or doped up or put them in some of the most unbearable humanitarian situations that you could ever imagine. Because at that time, that's what they believed in. They believed in their medicine. They believed that the only way to control a person that was uncontrollable was to control them with chemicals. That's where your dark side of your psychiatric community come from. The thing about what went on in my life, especially the third federal study, in going in front of Judge Woodall in Cadiz, Kentucky. Cadiz, Kentucky is whenever I went to LaGrange, Kentucky, and the doctor for the first time evaluated me, and he looked through the wall where I'd stuck a piece of paper up pertaining to a guy that had drawn me out as a comic strip of The End Is Near. And after the doctor asked me, he said, "The end of what?" And I looked at him, I said, "The end of the world." That's whenever he made a determination, you need to be put on Risperdal because I think you're this, this, and that. In other words, he made a medical decision based upon that comic strip of The End Is Near. And he should not have done that. Why? Because I was not showing any type of aggression or any type of violent intentions. You see, that's what they wanted me to do whenever I come back here to Northwest Tennessee from the year 2014 up until my brother died in 2017. They wanted to provoke either David or Juby into the degree that they started showing violent intentions. Once you start showing violent intentions, now you start giving the doctors as well as the judge a platform to work off of towards saying, this person is a danger to society. We want to take them out of society and we want to put them away. And that's what they was wanting in Dresden, Tennessee, pertaining to their authorities. Why? Because the plot had already started. Even way before then, let's destroy this individual's life. We do not want this individual to have any type of influence in the eyes of society, even though he was the one that made the telephone call to the White House in 1983 that he was going to be the one to meet the Antichrist, even though he was the one that spearheaded the peace movement that began in the Reagan era whenever 9 tapes wound up going to the White House, even though they know that it was only by the grace of God that I was still here to be able to talk, walk, and do the things that I'm doing. So there was a underlining motive that began right here in Weakley County and Obion County in Northwest Tennessee. Let's destroy this individual at all cost. At all cost was the words coming from James Robert Jackson while I was going back to Kentucky in the year 2007 of going through another 40-day, 40-night ceremony of God sanctifying another sword. The first one got hocked by the government. Got hocked by the Madison County Department being supervised through Homeland Security Secret Service. Got hocked. Well, they thought that would shut me up. Well, if we take this instrument from him, he'll go away. Or if we make life hard enough on him, he'll quit this. Or if we run him through the mill over here, or run him through the mill over here, he'll get the ideal. He'll shut up. He'll give up this quest, this ideal. Well, you know what? If it would have been something that I had derivated off of my own thoughts, off of my own power, off of my own ideals, they would probably be right. I would have probably already given up. Or I would have reached a level that I would have done something even more consequential towards possibly taking my own life or losing my mind or something. I don't know. I may have been locked up indefinitely in a psychiatric ward to the degree that they never found out anything else about me. But thank God that God was on my side, and it was God that gave me the inspiration to begin with. It was God the one that saved my life pertaining to an anointing that fell upon my life whenever I was only basically about 4 or 5 years old up in Antioch, Illinois, whenever my mother was given a premonition shortly after my youngest brother was born. So all this stuff, I'm going to use the word stuff, that the founder of the Windmill Ministries has been through, first of all, is a bunch of BS. Especially under the degree of knowing what our ancestors intended for us to live by which was under the pretense of our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. That my rights had been violated from day one, going back into whenever the ministry first exposed itself into the eyes of the public in 1989. 1989 was whenever they moved, later that fall is whenever they moved towards taking the instrument away from me, the sword symbolizing peace on earth. They wanted to get that out of my life. Well, maybe that'd shut him up. Maybe that'd do away with this. This has been an ongoing affairs that I have scraped up against either psychiatrists, the medical industry, or the medical industry pertaining to the miracles that's taking place in my life, or various law enforcement agencies, regardless whether it was local, state, or Kentucky, or Oklahoma City. And there's been a whole array of a pattern going on that you can see towards wanting to silence me that actually began in 1989, whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the general public in having a sequence over here on the radio station in voicing my opinion about how that I had interpreted the scriptures of various things that was going on. That I was given the ultimatum after about the fourth week of either get off the radio station or seek employment elsewhere. So that was the first jab. Let's silence him. Or let's give him ultimatum for him to silence himself, that if he don't shut up about the end time events pertaining to the Antichrist, pertaining to the mark of the beast, pertaining to the New World Order, pertaining to the opening of the four horsemen out of the seven seals, pertaining to the two witnesses, if he don't shut up, will make his life so miserable that he wished that he had of. Well, now, after 30 some odd years has passed in them doing this, now it is backfired on them to the degree that instead of making my life miserable, now they've made their own lives miserable. They have brought a state of affairs up into their own lives. And the bad thing about this is, the sorry thing about all this is that not only now is it affecting the guilty, those that was participating in this type of spiritual warfare movement, but now it's affecting their own people that they care about. Their children, their children's children, their mothers, their fathers, their cousins, their nieces, their aunts. And now, proof is in the pudding that they have misjudged me. That they did not anticipate for me to last this long towards playing dead man's bluff. Because whenever the heat would get so hot, I would either abandon the area or I would just shut up. I'd give it up temporarily. Just shut up. Keep your mouth shut. Don't say nothing. Don't be passing out no more material. Don't be putting out no more. Don't be like the Flim Flam man out here passing out CDs or DVDs or VHS tapes or whatever. Just shut up. Don't say nothing. And eventually the heat would go away. And ordinarily it would. But I would have to basically play dead man's bluff to do that. Which once more was prolonging my calling by them using these delay tactics. Well, while they was using all these delay tactics, in the meantime, I was having to put my message through the back of the church doors versus the front. And it wasn't until after I come back here in 2014, it was, I think, in 2015, was whenever I reached out towards getting a hold of the new modern day telephone of today, that I basically created my own social media platform. So I'm very, very aware that the majority of people that study me, that look at me, are not looking at me to support me. They're not looking at me to love me. They're not looking at me to uphold or support me. They're looking at me so that they can condemn me. They're looking at me so that they can ruin me. The same type of scenarios went in on Jesus Christ's life, because so many times Christ would say what he was saying, and then they would ask him, well, what do you say about this coin, the reflection upon this coin? What do you think about Caesar? Christ looked at the coin. Christ figured out what they was getting at, and then Christ would answer them. Or a lot of times, Christ would answer a question by asking a question, and that in and of itself would throw them off guard to the degree that they was basically left there speechless. Kind of like whenever the woman got caught in the act of adultery, and they was fixing to stone her to death. That's whenever Christ looked at them and asked them a question. In the degree, the person that has no sin in their lives at all, let him catch the first stone. And they all started dropping their stones, and they all walked away because they know that they was guilty, every one of them, in having some sort of sin in their lives. It may not have been that particular type of sin, but they had sin in their lives. And then a lot of times Christ would tell somebody not to say something, knowing that if he told them that, using reverse psychology, that they would do just the very opposite, that they would get out here and spread it all over Timbuktu. Christ was, let me word this correctly. Christ was the guru whenever it come to the smartness of all existences. In other words, there wasn't nothing that could outsmart him. And I do think that out of the carnal flesh, out of Christ, he was, in a way, kind of hoping for the best, but expecting the worst, that he could conform, that he could gain or gather some sort of a movement during the time that he was walking and talking amongst us over 2,000 years ago, until finally, there towards the last, he goes up into the mountain in a state of depression, I believe, and looked down upon to the town that he was trying to spare, that he was trying to save, and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I've gathered you together as a hen would gather her chicks, and you would not listen. I think at that point in time, Jesus not only knew about their doom, but Christ also knew about his own physical doom, that he was going to have to go through the full concept of the crucifixion and be raised again, build the house back again on the third day, that he would have to do things according to plan. That basically, beyond that point, is whenever certain factors started happening, and he basically brought a death sentence up into his own life whenever he went into the temple. And instead of going to the right side that he always went to, he went to the left side. And not only did he go into the temple and turn over the tables and cause a ruckus in there, but he also grabbed up a bullwhip and started popping it, which at that time, if you was good with a bullwhip, because they didn't have gunpowder back then, they didn't have guns, they had swords, but if you was good with a bullwhip, it was looked upon as being lethal, because you could literally cut somebody's ear off and never touch the scalp of their head. Or you could be good enough to take a fly on somebody's ear and kill the fly off their ear and never touch their ear, if you was that good with a bullwhip. So whenever Christ grabbed the bullwhip, it put fear in their hearts of the Pharisees and the Philistines and everybody else that was in there doing what they was doing in the temple. And that's whenever the concept changed. Not only are we going to scrutinize this person, not only are we going to listen to everything that he's got to say, not only are we going to use trickery questions on him to see what his answers are, but now at this point in time, we're going to kill him. You know why? Because Christ had put fear in their hearts. And once they identified on Palm Sunday that there was certain people, that there was breaking through towards laying palms down and saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, that there was certain people that was looking upon Christ in a physical form towards him being a physical king. And Christ was never to have been any type of physical king, not in the political sense of what we know of today. That's what's so confusing whenever people look at some of my work and I put on there, thus saith the Lord, let it be said, let it be written, let it be done. That's not, I'm not running towards office, towards being a political king. I'm following the footsteps of a spiritual king, in believing that if I am obedient to my spiritual king pertaining to my Savior, maybe one day I myself will become a spiritual king. I know I'm never going to become a political king. Don't want to become a political king. Don't want to be a politician, regardless whether it be a mayor, a governor, or whatever, senator, congressman, whatever. I don't want to pursue in that arena, because if you ask me, in order to pursue in a man-made arena is enemies of God. There may be a few people out there that can walk with God and still pursue the satisfaction coming from humanity. But by and large, if you are a man-made political ruler, you're going to be going with the masses, as far as the richest of the rich, the ones that's already in power. Well, now 30 plus years has passed, to the degree that now it's pretty obvious that somebody's messed up over here in America pertaining to their political kings, pertaining to their politics, that has made a mess out of things. Whenever you're looking at a country that's 30 plus $6 trillion, whenever you're looking at all the violence and all the hostility going on in our streets. So they have failed. Various people in this county, Weakley County, within arm's throwing distance of where I live, has failed. And you would think that they would have enough sense to know when they have failed. But because of their pride and because of their arrogance, because of their egos, they will refuse to admit of their failures. They had rather take this to their graves in thinking that I can escape accountability issues even if I have to create a diversion in confusing the people. And that's exactly where we are today, because I had a conversation last night with an individual that is having health problems, and I wound up donating one of my handicap items to him, and also had some clothes from his sister that I needed to go over and take to him. And as we was having this conversation, you know, one of the first things that we agreed upon, that during all this confusion and conflict of yesterday pertaining to all the protesting going on, that if it was to get totally out of hand, basically martial law, one of the first things that our government would do would dismantle our communications to where we could no longer unify, where we would no longer be able to pull together in trying to defeat this evil force that was coming against us this way. That would be one of the first things that they'd pull the plug on, would be the internet. And that's probably one reason why that they continue to keep talking about a blackout. And they want to have some kind of excuse, reason why it done this. So they're going to say, well, it was because of the sun that hit a certain satellite that dismantled the internet. They've got a reason, or they're going to come up with some sort of an ideal or reason in the exchange of everything that's going on right now. And I promise you, if you really get to looking deep down, it's all an entanglement of lies, deceit, towards basically feeding their own pockets and not helping the masses, pretending to be the people. That's where we are. That's where they are. They have created this environment, and just like I told the individual that I was talking to last night there in Martin, Tennessee, that where they got jinxed at was whenever they done what they done in plain view down in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas. That's what jinxed them. Whenever they done that in hopes of pulling the wool over the American people's eyes, in which the vast majority of the media at that time was involved in this, along with ATF, along with FBI, along with the President of the United States at that time, Bill Clinton, and Janet Reno, that they actually thought that they had done something in getting away with. What they done was bring condemnation upon to their own country. What they done was jinx us all to the degree that the Father quit blessing us. And if the Father ain't blessing us towards protecting us, then we're basically open prey. And now they're realizing that there's been a mess up, but they don't know how to straighten it up. So now all of a sudden they put this player in there pretending Donald Trump. Well, let's cut here, let's cut here, let's look at this, let's look at that, pretending fraud and abuse, etc. In which all that's fine as long as you do it and you do it appropriately. But now it was Donald J. Trump that got elected towards dismantling all these illegal immigrants. But the way that he's doing it is causing that much more problems rather than a solution to them. Because whenever you dismantle whole communities, that is a sanctuary town or sanctuary city or sanctuary state, you're going to cause more problems than you cause good. So what the individual was talking about a while ago, that they're going to have to go in and reform this in some sort of a way because you can't put 40 million people in prison. I mean, you're talking about a travesty that's happened to America. So what's going to be the next best thing whenever it comes to all the illegals? First of all, this government needs to come clean in telling the people the truth. And if they're not willing to come clean, we can only look forward to more hardship falling upon society. Now, I've tried and tried and tried to make my case, to rally the people. Obviously, they're either blinded, don't care, or something's wrong with them. It's almost like everybody drunk out of the same fountain. Well, it's called spiritual deception. And then you combine that with pride, and then you combine that with stupidity, you got a formula of where we are right now, along with everything else, that basically the perfect storm is right around the corner, coming near a neighborhood near you. Welcome to the 21st century as far as what the crooked, the cheating, the dishonest, the manipulators, the intimidators have done to us now in the past 30 plus years, that not only is affecting the American people's lives, but affecting millions of people's lives all over the world. That's what Kenton, Tennessee, O'Brien County, that's what Martin and Dresden, Tennessee, as far as Weakley County, that's the things that they can beat their chest on like a bunch of apes in bragging about themselves that they have brought up onto their own people. That's what they can do out of pride or ignorance or whatever category that you want to put it in. Because I promise you, the fault is going to fall upon to the feet of those that encountered up into this rebellion. They wasn't going to have Jesus Christ telling them what they either could or couldn't do. Away with him, away with him. Just like they wasn't going to have Dennis James Jackson having him tell them what they either could or could not do. Away with him, away with him. And they tried on every angle imaginable, but I'm still here talking. I'm still here loving. I'm still here resolving and understanding not only what they've done to me, but what they have done to millions of others all over the world, that one day these people are going to stand guilty of. They may die tomorrow. They may have an elegant funeral, okay? And they may think as they're dying, we got away with that, didn't we? No, you didn't get away with that. What you done, you brung torture into not only other people's lives that you claim that you care about, but you brought torture up into the world. And I guarantee you, as Jesus was dying, as Jesus himself was being crucified, he looked down on the first part of the execution, of the crucifixion, and said, "Weep not for me, but weep for yourselves, and weep for your children and your children's children, because of this rebellion. You know why? Because Jesus knew what was coming around the corner. And if you'll study history and figure out what happened shortly after Christ come and gone and was resurrected and descended back up into heavens, you will see some of the most horrible, harrowing factors that happened to the Middle East that you could ever dream of. That you could ever dream of. That they brought upon to themselves. They jinxed themselves. I didn't jinx America because of what went on in Mount Carmel, Waco, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They done it to themselves. You may be saying, who done it? Various people working for the government. Either ATF, U.S. Marshals, FBI, whoever. They're all part of the same system. And in ways, I think Donald Trump knows this, and he's trying to dismantle from within. But my God, the damages that he's going to do by doing so. And I'm not saying that it doesn't need to be done, because a lot of it does need to be done. It needs to start at the top and work its way down to the bottom, not go to the bottom and work its way up to the top. But to do that, especially after we have went this long, 30 plus years, being $36 trillion in debt, you're basically going to be cutting your own throats. And I think that's what somebody finally made a point to Elon Musk, that, hey, by you breaking away from the White House pretending Donald Trump, you're only cutting your own throat. You're cutting the company's throat. You're cutting all of our throats, because the only way that Google and Facebook and all these other social media entities is going to survive is going to be through the government. And the only way that the government is going to be able to do this is through those social medias. So they're both now hand in hand working together. They finally figured out that a divided house will not stand. So Elon Musk apologizes to the president, and he goes back to the president. I'm telling you, folks, this is something deep and dark that not only started in my personal life and not only started in my family's personal lives back years ago, but this is something that's been going on in basically wanting to eradicate good from the existences of the world since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of time, because it was King Herod that ordered for over 5,000 children to be beheaded, thinking that he was going to, that the odds was good towards him at least being able to take this Christ child out of the picture. Well, it just so happens God protected that Christ child, just like God protected Moses whenever Moses was going through the things that Moses was going through whenever he was a child. It just so happens, if you go to studying almost all the prophets of God that had an anointing on their lives, God made ways for them people. They may have had to go through extreme, dire situations, but ultimately in the end, it was God that won over, because God is a patient God, a loving God, and a fair God, and a graceful God. And if it's been anointed by God, you cannot overthrow it. And that's the only reason why that I'm here today, talking in behind the camera, making this social media recorded link.
News on the attack on Minnesota lawmakers, a sprawling investigation, an urgent manhunt underway for this man. Vance Belter, the 57-year-old, is at large more than 24 hours now after two shootings outside of Minneapolis. Police say that Belter is armed and dangerous, though he may have left a trail of clues behind. So if you recall, this all began early Saturday when Democratic State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were killed. Her colleague, State Senator John Hoffman, and his wife are right now hospitalized after they were shot multiple times in a separate attack. Senators from Minnesota condemning the shocking violence today.
Our delegation in Minnesota, from the most conservative Republican to the most liberal Democrat, we all joined together, Senator Emmer and I and others, and said we condemn this political violence.
I think that the level of...
See, they're calling it political violence, because I guarantee you they're going to blame Trump for this. But if you really want to know the truth, it's not political violence. It's spiritual violence. And whenever it comes to street justice, that's what we're seeing right now, because the people are finally awakening and realizing that, my God, these people have drove us down this endless path of doom and gloom. Now, I don't agree with doing people that way because of street justice. But the bottom line is this: it's not about the Democrats or the Republicans anymore. It's about survival. And that's what's happening to all these other countries, especially Russia. They're starting to look at this from a different perspective, towards a survival perspective. What must we do to survive this? Because they know that we're living in dire end times. And from what I can tell, not only are the American politicians still making wrong decisions, as well as the preachers, but so are other officials all over the world. And it's really sad, because I can see the trajectory that they're on, and I know if I can see it, other people can see it. But yet now they refuse to change their course. So maybe they are dead set in creating this diversion in hopes of they won't have to give accountability to the people. Once more, it's wickedness that's still trying to stay in charge. It's wickedness that wants to dominate everybody's lives. It's wickedness that wants to keep everybody massively confused and deranged and broke and basically subjective to their will. This is evil, my friends. This is evil in the fullest. And to think that somebody had to, to go in and do this to these people, it takes a bold individual to think that you're going to go into somebody's domain, knowing that they got all kinds of security cameras and all kinds of security, and go in there and do something like this to people. It's wicked. It ain't got nothing to do with political. This is wicked. This is evil in the fullest. And if you can't identify that, then you yourself are out of touch with real reality.
Of threat that lawmakers are exposed to is just unacceptable. And that we have to find a way of ratcheting down this this just intensity that is surrounding people.
NBC's Adrian Broadus is joining me right now from the Minnesota Emergency Operations Center. Adrian, welcome. Let's get the very latest on the search for the suspect and anything more we're learning about this man.
Obviously, certain people get in Tennessee in 1983 and in 1986 and 87, and in other people's lives in the surrounding Northwest Tennessee area didn't think all this through, did they? They didn't think about, well, what if this guy lives? What if this guy gets to tell his story? What if we fail in our attempts? What's going to be the dire circumstances in it? And you know what? These people can live with that. They can take it all the way to their deaths if they want to. But the bottom line is this: they still haven't tried to right a wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, they're still digging all of our graves. Not just their own, but basically the world's grave. That's sad. That is sad.
Authorities say he was impersonating a police officer. He even had an SUV, which was...
Now that's what we got to worry about today, is imposters. People dressing up like police officers. Imposters. Which verifies what Jesus said, that they would come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they would be raging wolves. Just like a great deal of our politicians and our judges and a great deal of our law enforcement people that claim that they're in it to win it for the good of the people, for the betterment of the people, for the safety of the people. But then again, they attack people like myself. Oh my God. If people can't see this, they don't want to see it.
Like a squad car. We are hearing also from his housemate, who says he received a text message from his roommate. Take a listen.
I just want to let you know that I love you guys both, and I wish it hadn't gone this way. I don't want to say anything more and implicate you in any way, because
You guys don't know anything about this. But I love you guys, and I'm sorry for all the trouble this has caused. He was a loving, caring guy, loved his family, loved his friends, and loved God, and I don't know why he did what he did. It's not Vance.
And in another incident, he's also accused of shooting State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette. As we've been telling you, they were rushed to the hospital and underwent surgery. We're also told from a nephew of the couple that no major arteries were hit when that couple was shot. And also, we're learning one of the bullets was lodged in the chest of the state senator near his heart. But again, no major arteries. And Alex, I just want to show you these two Minnesota papers. Two papers here with one message. It says unspeakable. And that really describes what people are feeling here. I've been trading text messages over the weekend with folks here, and someone telling me just a short time ago that it still doesn't feel real.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me tell you another nugget that we heard about Yvette Hoffman, that apparently their adult daughter was home at the time and she threw her body in front of her daughter so that she would not be injured. That is, a stunning thing as well. And her daughter was not injured. So she was successful in that. She now, though, remains in the hospital. Adrian, thank you so much for that. Joining us right now, we have retired FBI agent Rob D'Amico and former Boston Police Commissioner Edward Davis. Ed, Rob, welcome to you both. And as you, actually not as you, Ed, are you surprised that this suspect, Vance Belter, is still at large? I'm curious what law enforcement is doing to track him down.
Right. Well, it's unfortunate that they weren't able to get their hands on him during the initial encounter, but there were shots exchanged, and the chaos around an incident like that can be very difficult. And it also takes time to get officers to the scene. I mean, I can't compliment the local agency enough for checking other areas, other politicians' homes, and that was really what stopped the onslaught and actually could have saved many lives. So it was a real heads-up play. But in that chaotic few minutes, back doors can be left unguarded. It takes time to get the place surrounded. There's logistical issues, and so he's on the run. Mm-hmm. It took us 4 days to run down these guys from the Boston Marathon. That's not unusual. It's also not unusual to have a wide dragnet out there, but because he's moving around without a specific location, it makes it extremely difficult. And then the phone calls that you just described will sometimes lead in people committing suicide. So he could be in the woods somewhere. It already dead. I hate to say that, but that's a real possibility that the investigators are looking at, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring to mind the Tsarnaev brothers there from the Boston bombing, one of whom you'll recall was found in someone's backyard in a boat that was covered up. I mean, it was an extraordinary time. We're recalling that now. But Belter, he took off on foot, Ed. In your experience, what mode of transportation is likely after that? Is it a car waiting somewhere? Because the car, as our reporter was sharing, appeared to look like law enforcement, like an SUV that had the sirens and the lights, something at least implying that. And that was abandoned at the scene. So what happens if he's believed to have crossed state lines?
Well, that would lead one to believe that he had some assistance from someone else. If he lost his vehicle, he either had somebody pick him up, or he was able to either commandeer a vehicle or steal one. And that's not particularly easy to do in the middle of the night when you're in the middle of a pursuit. So I would be looking hard at his friends and acquaintances, his telephone activity, the things that he said online prior to the incident happening, to see if there's someone else involved here. It might be just him, but he got very lucky if he's got away and made his way miles, from that location without some assistance.
Well, we are getting word again. Adrian Broadus reported Sibley County is a focal point right now for all of you. Remind you of that, about 85 miles or so southwest of Minneapolis. So, Rob, we all heard Belcher's roommate and best friend, what he said about him in that very tear-filled testimony. He was surprised. He said this was out of character for his friend. And then there's the text message from the suspect who was apologizing to his friend. I'm curious how common this kind of communication is after a violent act, and who else police may want to talk to.
Yeah, I think he planned this all in his head. Obviously wasn't talking to other people about it unless he had someone in his movement that may have agreed with him on this, but obviously the roommates didn't. I think it's probably common that they try to get word out to some folks that, you know, they think they may not see again. He did say that about, you know, being killed soon, but the fact that he wore a mask during the initial one, it looked like a latex mask. He didn't want to get caught, and I think that was to go after other targets. But he now may think, since his plot was kind of foiled a bit, it might end in a shootout again. They fantasize about how this is going to go. So I don't know if he's going to go off in the woods and do that, or if he's going to, you know, they talk about suicide by cop or trying to get another target. But I think messages to people they think they're going to leave behind is probably, you know, goes on a bunch.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, my director, put back up that side by side, because you, Rob, have referenced the mask. It's very clear that there's something that's altering the state of his appearance there, you know, if you compare the two. Does it make it more difficult to look for him if he is still out there and hasn't, as Ed suggested, potentially committed suicide? Because he could put that mask back on, right?
I think he could have other masks too. So the fact that he had a mask for that, again, shows the planning in this. The fact that he was taken with the picture after it with the cowboy hat. But there's all kinds of planning. So they're definitely looking at his credit card purchases, Amazon purchases, as they're doing all the search warrant stuff. Does he have material for other disguises that he may be using, again, to carry out further on violent encounters? So they are definitely looking at all that. The fact that he did this to begin with shows an intent and how he's thinking of it. And he may have not just that disguise, other ones, which would, again, make it more difficult.
And what is the ripple effect across this country?
And you know, they just got to mention about the dragnet that's widened because of this individual. That was basically under the same type of scrutiny that I was under pertaining to a dragnet, especially whenever Lieutenant Barnes decided to put out a warrant for my arrest by saying that I had threatened him, a police officer in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, knowing good and well that I never did. But they was taking that threat coming from Mr. Barnes of his word being good. They was taking that as a green light towards widening the dragnet. And man, it had gotten to the point that I couldn't go nowhere, because I couldn't outrun the computer. And finally, it destroyed my life to the degree that I had to throw the towel in after the third federal evaluation in 2014. Tried to hold down a job in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, again, working for the same outfit that I'd worked for before that in a body shop. And once I identified that they was gunning for me, that they was holding my feet to the fire, and that these people was still misled in thinking that I was trying to hurt them, and that they was bringing up all kinds of false accusations on the internet about me, I knew then it was time for me to throw the towel in. And that's whenever I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and filed for my disability papers. And about 9-10 months later, finally found out the results of that after they had driven me to the point of destitute. Then, after I did get my disability, come back to Northwest Tennessee in 2014, and within 6 months, some a-hole had contacted the Social Security Department towards trying to have even that stopped. So they was trying to dismantle me and destroy me in so many different elements, in so many different ways it wasn't even funny. And the whole time my brother was having to be exposed to this. And because the scrutiny was so intense, it had an effect on his life. And I think it would have an effect on anybody's life. I didn't realize that your nerves can actually destroy your life. Your nerves can actually make you sick if you do not get a hold of what's going on in your life to the degree that you just don't let it affect you that way. Your nerves can drive you to sickness. Your nerves can drive you to depression. Your nerves can drive you to death if you let people get under your skin that way. And that's exactly what they wanted to do here in Northwest Tennessee, and they failed. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Holy Father. They failed just like they have failed thousands and millions of times before, going back thousands of years ago whenever the Luciferian Lucifer wanted to bring authoritarian evil to the rest of the world, and the world had to fight up against it. Just like I'm so proud today of our younger men and women that have stepped up to the plate in identifying what's happening here. And it hasn't been because of Donald Trump. I hate to take the wind out of his sail, but it's been because of the reality finally setting in with people and identifying that we're in trouble. And if we don't resist this force with other forces, it may be the doom to all of us. So I thank God for the patriotism stand that our young men and women have done just within the past 4 or 5 months this year because of all this. I just want that to be for the public record. And I'm fixing to end here by saying, you know, on Father's Day, it was tough whenever I was growing up after me having my firstborn and only born, my son, in 1979, because of all the influences going on in the world that I guess today you can probably multiply that times 100 or maybe even 1,000. But it's so difficult today for these young men, with it being Father's Day, of being able to latch on and stay grounded in their true heart and in their true desires pertaining to the love that they have in them. And I just pray to God that all this bad stuff will not taint them to the degree that they themselves become bad people because of all the bad things happening. And if you don't watch, that's what the devil is trying to do. He's trying to drag everybody down with him to the degree that you start turning on each other. And if you don't watch, that's exactly what the devil wants. He's out to kill, steal, and destroy, and he would rather for us all to turn on each other. That way, he could beat his chest and shake his fist in the face of the Father and say, look what I've done. Look what I accomplished. That began originally in a spiritual battle that has now suffered down to a physical one. I'm still going to believe and always believe that good is better than bad, that light is stronger than darkness, that love is greater than hate. Thank you for listening. God bless America. God bless our troops here on this 250-year anniversary birth date for the Army, because the bottom line is that they was here established, an established establishment, even before the colonial days pertaining to our government being established. The United States Army is the oldest establishment in this nation, period. And if people didn't take time to recognize that yesterday and honor those in armed services, well, pretty well speaks volumes about how you feel about wanting to be taken over by an evil entity. Because I promise you, the United States Army is not evil. They have tried to do things throughout history in a diplomatic, dignified way, and they have been admired by countries all over the world. And yesterday was a very, very special day whenever it comes to our men and women in arms. Thanks again. God bless America. God bless our troops. And most definitely, God bless our endeavors towards which way we, as not only Americans, but as Christian Americans, go from this moment on in trying to rid or eradicate the axis of evil. Thanks again, and God bless. Shalom.